It was a rare day of English summer, that fleeting, perfumed season when the meadows of Surrey lie shimmering beneath a haze of gold and the hedgerows burst with roses and bees. The narrow road that wound towards the village of Tillingham curved around gentle hills and came, at last, to rest beneath the wrought iron gates of Lavender Hill, a stately Georgian house of soft honeyed stone, ivy clinging in tasteful restraint to its facade. From the terrace, one could see the fields sloping down to a ribbon of river, and the pale spire of St. Jude's beyond. To the casual observer, all was peace, a picture of English domestic calm. Yet, as Captain Arthur Hastings was later to reflect, there was something faintly strained in the atmosphere of that place, like the pause before a storm. Hastings himself arrived shortly after midday, steering the small hired motorcar up the drive. In the passenger seat beside him, immaculate in gray silk gloves and a perfectly symmetrical bowler, sat Hercule Poirot, compact, precise, and exuding the sort of contained dignity that seemed immune to both weather and time. "My dear Hastings," said Poirot, peering through the windscreen. "England in the summer, it is truly a matter of great national optimism. One lives in hope of 3 fine days in succession. N'est-ce pas?" Hastings laughed. "We're lucky enough with 2, old chap. And Lavender Hill looks quite the place. Lady Constance will be delighted to have you to luncheon. I understand she keeps something of a salon here, poets, colonels, people of that sort." Poirot inclined his head. "I am most curious to meet our hostess, though I suspect it is less for poetry that she invites her guests and more for the exercise of her formidable curiosity about the affairs of others." He smiled faintly. "A woman who loves secrets, Hastings, is one who sooner or later will find herself in possession of too many." They ascended the drive. The house stood in full sunlight, shutters half closed to keep out the heat. At the top of the steps, the butler, a tall, spare man with the pallor of a dedicated servant, admitted them with grave courtesy. "Lady Constance is expecting you, gentlemen. Luncheon will be served shortly." They were shown into a drawing-room of restrained elegance. Pale walls, French windows opening onto the gardens, and the faint scent of lavender drifting from a bowl upon the escritoire. A few guests were already gathered, talking in the manner of people long acquainted but faintly wary of one another. Lady Constance Whitmore rose to greet them. She was a woman of 60, handsome still in an austere fashion, her hair silver but perfectly arranged, her dress of lavender silk. Her eyes, of a clear gray, were the sort that observed everything and gave away nothing. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, extending a hand, "it is a singular honor. My late husband used to speak of you. He once met you in Cairo, I believe." "Ah, yes," said Poirot, bowing. "The Colonel Whitmore, he had the military mind most exact, most admirable." "It is I who am honored, madam." "Come," she said. "You must meet our little circle. You will find no mysteries here, I promise, only idle gossip and overcooked roast beef." Poirot smiled. "We shall see, madam. Sometimes, even in the roast beef, there hides a clue." Laughter followed, polite but not entirely spontaneous. There was Major Gerald Fenton, bluff and ruddy, with a booming laugh that echoed too loudly in the refined room. "Lady Constance runs a fine ship," he declared, slapping Hastings on the back. "We old campaigners must stick together, eh? You'll find her son Edmund about somewhere. Good fellow, bit of a spendthrift but heart in the right place." Hastings murmured agreement, glancing across at a young man lounging by the window. Edmund Whitmore had the air of someone who had seen too much of life too early, charming, handsome. Dr. Crane smiled. "I should not dare to contradict you, Lady Constance. But you would disagree all the same," she returned, eyes gleaming. "You always do." Her son laughed, a little too quickly. "Mother enjoys an argument, Doctor. She thrives on it." Violet said softly, "She thrives on winning them." The remark fell into a silence, and Poirot's dark eyes flicked up at once. He said nothing, merely observed the way Lady Constance's fingers tightened upon her napkin. After luncheon, the company dispersed to the gardens. Poirot and Hastings walked along the lavender-bordered path that led towards a small ornamental pond. "A curious household," Hastings observed. "Friendly enough, but, well, Not quite the sort of warmth one expects. Poirot nodded. Indeed, there is untension subtle, as we say. The atmosphere, mon ami, it trembles like a string drawn too tight. Lady Constance dominates. The son resents. The wife fears. The doctor watches. The secretary waits. And yet they smile, these good English people. He stooped to examine a sprig of lavender. Tell me, Hastings, do you perceive the perfume? Of course. Lovely scent. Just so. Yet consider, if one were to mix it with a certain poison, it would disguise the odor most effectively. Hastings looked startled. Poirot, surely you're not suggesting. Poirot laughed softly. Non, my friend. I suggest nothing. Only that, in such tranquil surroundings, the human heart may yet hold dark possibilities. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, the guests assembled in the drawing room for bridge and brandy. Outside, the air was still, the scent of lavender drifting through the open windows. Lady Constance, seated at her escritoire, appeared in high spirits, discussing her plans for the following week, a visit to London, a meeting with her solicitor, some talk of altering her will. I've decided, she said lightly, that I must make certain provisions. Edmund is too generous by half, he would. There was laughter again, thin and uneasy. Poirot sat watching, fingertips together, his gaze drifting from face to face, and pausing briefly on Miss Briggs, who was staring at the fire with an expression that might almost have been hatred. At 10 o'clock, the household retired. Poirot and Hastings took their leave, walking back through the quiet lane to their inn at the edge of the village. Fireflies drifted like sparks above the hedgerows. Well, Poirot, said Hastings, that was a curious evening, but quite pleasant, I thought. Pleasant, yes, murmured Poirot. Curious, most certainly. Yet, Hastings, remember this, beneath the lavender, there may lie the worm. Hastings laughed. You sound almost prophetic, old fellow. Poirot smiled faintly, adjusting his gloves. Ah, mon ami, perhaps I am, for I have the feeling that before many days have passed, the peace of Lavender Hill will be disturbed. Very greatly disturbed indeed. And as they turned down the moonlit lane, the great house behind them stood silent and lovely, its windows dark, its gardens asleep, while somewhere unseen, the first shadow of tragedy began to stir. Chapter 2. The Death at Lavender Hill. The next morning dawned pale and still, the early mist lying low across the lawns of Lavender Hill. The air held that curious, heavy quietness that precedes a storm or tragedy. In the servants' quarters, the maids moved softly about their duties. In the kitchen, Mrs. Hargreaves, the cook, grumbled to herself about the milkman's lateness. Shortly after 8 o'clock, the household began to stir. Violet Whitmore came down to breakfast looking unusually wan. Her husband Edmund, still in his dressing gown, was reading a letter with an expression of irritation. Lady Constance was not yet down. She said last night she'd be working in her study early, Violet remarked, pouring herself coffee. Something about letters she must write before the post goes out. Edmund shrugged. My mother keeps the most unholy hours. I dare say she's up to her elbows in papers already. I'm going to London today, business. At that, Violet looked up sharply. Business, Edmund? You mean the gambling debts again? He frowned. You needn't repeat the word like a curse. It's a trifling sum. But Violet said no more. Dr. Crane entered a few minutes later, immaculate as ever, greeting them both with that professional composure which conceals every emotion. He poured himself a cup of tea and inquired politely after Lady Constance. She's in her study, Edmund said shortly. Hasn't been seen yet this morning. I passed her door at 7, said Miss Briggs, coming in with a pile of letters. I heard her moving about. She told me she wished to be left undisturbed until 8:30. It was at precisely 8:30 that the butler, Peters, came into the breakfast room. His face, ordinarily impassive, was drained of color. Beg pardon, sir, he said in a hoarse whisper. But Lady Constance, she's not answering. Violet half rose from her chair. Not answering? Peters swallowed. The door's locked. I knocked several times. There's no sound. Dr. Crane set down his cup. Show me. The small procession moved swiftly along the corridor to Lady Constance's study, a pleasant room at the back of the house overlooking the gardens. The door, as Peters had said, was locked from the inside. Dr. Crane rapped sharply. Lady Constance? Miss Crane. May I come in? No reply. Break it down, Edmund said in a low voice. The butler hesitated. Sir, the panel. Do as I tell you. Took only a moment. The old lock gave way under the combined effort of Edmund and the butler. The door swung inward with a splintering sound. The scene that met their eyes was one none of them would ever forget. Lady Constance sat at her writing desk, her body slumped forward, her head resting upon her arm. The morning light streamed in through the tall windows, glinting on the silver frame of a photograph beside her. A teacup lay overturned near her hand, its contents pooled upon a stack of papers. The faint scent of lavender hung in the air. Good God, whispered Edmund. Dr. Crane was already at her side. He touched her wrist, then her throat, with deft fingers. His expression did not change, but his voice was quiet when he spoke. She's gone. Heart attack, Violet asked faintly. Dr. Crane hesitated. Perhaps, but I should like to be certain. There's something odd. He pointed to the teacup. She must have been drinking this shortly before death. It has a peculiar odor, not merely tea. Miss Briggs gasped. Oh no, not poison? He did not reply at once. I shall need to make an examination. Edmund, I must ask that nothing be touched until the police arrive. By 9:30, the local constable had arrived, followed soon after by Inspector Lestrade of the Surrey Constabulary, a solid man of middle years, practical, rather skeptical. He conducted his preliminary inquiries with brisk efficiency, making notes in a small, dog-eared book. Found at her desk, door locked, key inside, window fastened. No sign of struggle, he muttered. Doctor, you say it could be poison? Dr. Crane nodded. It's possible. There's a faint odor of bitter almonds. I'd like to send the cup for analysis. Lestrade grunted. We'll see to that. And the key being inside, that suggests she locked herself in. Suicide, Edmund said sharply. My mother would never. Lestrade lifted a hand. No conclusions yet, sir. We'll keep an open mind. At that moment, there came the sound of a car drawing up in the drive. The doorbell rang, and in another instant, Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings were shown in. Lestrade looked up with an expression half of respect, half of annoyance. Monsieur Poirot, didn't expect to find you here. Poirot inclined his head gravely. Nor did I expect to find myself here, Inspector. But when I learned from the maid that Lady Constance was not quite herself, and saw your constable arrive, I feared that something was amiss. He glanced towards the open door of the study. May I? Lestrade hesitated only a moment. You're welcome to look, sir. Always glad of your eye on these things, unofficially, of course. Poirot stepped softly into the study. Hastings followed, notebook in hand. The little Belgian stood for a long moment without speaking, his eyes traveling slowly over the room, from the body at the desk to the scattered papers, to the fireplace where a small heap of ashes still smoldered faintly. He moved closer to the desk. The teacup, untouched since discovery? Dr. Crane nodded. Yes. Poirot bent and sniffed delicately. Ah yes, bitter almonds, indeed. Cyanide, most likely. But the odor is faint, curiously faint. The tea itself may have been infused with some scent, lavender, perhaps, to disguise it. He straightened. And the key, you say it was inside? Lestrade pointed. Still in the lock. Poirot examined it without touching. Interesting. And this window locked from within, yes. Curtains drawn aside, but the latch engaged. A very neat tableau. He looked at the fireplace. Someone has burned papers recently. You can see the edges of a letter, but not enough to read. A pity. Hastings noted the details rapidly, his brow furrowed. Poirot's gaze wandered to the small silver photograph frame upon the desk. A portrait of a man in uniform, the late Colonel Whitmore. The glass was cracked. He touched it lightly with a gloved finger. You observe, Hastings, a small crack, and yet the frame remains upright. It was not knocked over by accident. It was replaced. Lestrade frowned. Meaning, said Poirot softly, that someone was here after death, or wished to make it appear so. An hour later, the body had been removed. The doctor and inspector had completed their first formalities, and the household had gathered once more in the drawing-room, silent, pale, and shaken. Lestrade addressed them in his practical manner. This may have been a natural death, but until we know more, I must ask you all to remain on the premises. No one is to leave Lavender Hill without permission. There are certain questions to be answered. Poirot, standing near the fireplace, observed each face in turn. Edmund's expression was one of bewildered anger. Violet sat rigid, her hands clasped tight in her lap. Miss Briggs trembled, her eyes wide and glassy. Major Fenton looked stricken, and Dr. Crane, as ever, inscrutable. Poirot cleared his throat gently. Inspector, may I make a small observation? Lestrade sighed but nodded. Go ahead. Poirot's voice was calm. You see, Lady Constance was last seen alive by whom? Miss Briggs spoke faintly. By me, monsieur, at 7 o'clock. She said she wished to be left alone. She was writing letters. Letters that are not now here, said Poirot. For I perceive the stationery is unused. Yet there are ashes in the grate. Someone burned correspondence, recently, perhaps even after her death. And there is the curious matter of the door locked from within. Suicide, then? Lestrade suggested. Poirot shook his head gently.
Non, mon cher.
Lady Constance was a woman of pride, not despair. Besides, consider this. If she had wished to take her life, she would not have locked herself in from within with such precision. Suicide seeks privacy. Yes, but not artifice. He turned to Hastings. And do you recall, mon ami, what I said last night as we walked from the house? Hastings nodded slowly. That beneath the lavender may lie the worm. Poirot inclined his head. Exactly. And now, Hastings, the worm has shown itself. He looked again at the faces before him, each strained, each concealing something. There is something rotten beneath this serenity, he said softly. Lady Constance did not die by chance. And before this day is out, we shall begin to see the pattern beneath the lavender. Chapter 3. The Arrival of the Detective. The formal arrival of Hercule Poirot as the investigator of Lady Constance's death took place, curiously enough, without ceremony. By 10:30 that morning, the servants had retreated in whispers to their domain below stairs, and the household above existed in a state of stunned quiet. The scent of lavender hung faintly still in the study. The sun shone benignly upon the lawns, and yet the atmosphere within Lavender Hill had shifted entirely. Inspector Lestrade, practical and somewhat uneasy in the presence of the celebrated Belgian, had drawn Poirot aside into the morning room. Hastings followed, notebook in hand. Lestrade said, You know how these things are, sir. Until the analysis comes back from Guilford, we can't speak with certainty. But the business of the locked door, well, it doesn't sit quite right with me. You're willing to take a look officially? Poirot inclined his head gravely. If you permit, yes. Not officially, perhaps, but with the approval of your department, Hein. You may rely that I shall not overstep. Lestrade's expression softened. Between ourselves, sir, I'll be glad of it. These country households, he gestured vaguely toward the ceiling. They breed secrets like damp breeds mold. Half of them are at daggers drawn over wills and dowries, and the other half are pretending to be happy about it.
Très juste, murmure Poirot.
And Lady Constance, she was a woman of property? Quite. Lavender Hill's worth a fair sum, and the income from her late husband's investments besides. Poirot nodded. And her son, he inherits? So it stands, unless she altered her will recently. She mentioned it, apparently, last night at dinner. Ah, said Poirot softly. That will prove most interesting. But before we leap to conclusions, Inspector, let us first set in order lest fate exacts. We will reconstruct, step by step, The events from last evening to the moment of discovery. Yes, Hastings. Yes, old chap. Hastings flipped open his notebook. I took down the times as best I could recall them. The evening before. Poirot stood before the tall window of the morning room, hands clasped behind his back. At what hour, Hastings, did we leave Lavender Hill last night? About 10 o'clock. Lady Constance had just said she meant to write letters before retiring.
Bon.
So, we may suppose that from 10 o'clock onwards she remained in her study. Poirot turned to Lestrade. And the servants? The housekeeper states that Lady Constance rang her bell for tea at 10:30. The butler, Peters, took it in. He says she seemed perfectly herself. Poirot's eyebrows lifted. You see, Hastings, the tea, that fatal cup, it was brought at 10:30. Tell me, Inspector, did Peters prepare it himself? He says Mrs. Hargreaves brewed it in the kitchen and he carried it on a tray. Poirot frowned slightly. We must verify that detail. A small change in routine can conceal a great deal. 2. The morning. Now, at 7 o'clock, Miss Briggs hears Lady Constance moving in her room. Poirot continued. That agrees with Dr. Crane's estimate of the time of death. Between 7 and 8, perhaps? Crane, who had joined them by now, answered with professional calm. I would place it nearer to 8. The body was still warm when we entered at 8:45. Eh bien, said Poirot. So she lives at least until 7:30, and perhaps until 8 o'clock. The door is locked, the key inside. Peters knocks shortly after 8, no answer. He fetches the others. The door is forced at 8:20.
Voilà.
Lestrade nodded. That's the sequence as we've got it. Poirot smiled faintly. You perceive, my friends, how neat it all is. Too neat, perhaps. A door locked, a window fastened, a key in the lock, all the appearances of suicide or natural death. And yet the perfume of lavender, the faint odor of almonds, they whisper of something more deliberate. He turned suddenly to Hastings. You observe, mon ami, that every element of this crime has been arranged to soothe the mind of the unimaginative. But Poirot, he is cursed with imagination. 3. The interviews begin. By late morning, Poirot had established himself in the small library adjoining the drawing room, his notebook open, his mustaches glinting with fastidious precision. Lestrade, somewhat grudgingly impressed, agreed to allow him to conduct the initial interviews. So long as I'm present, he said firmly. One by one, the occupants of Lavender Hill entered, each bearing their own nervousness and secrets like invisible luggage. 1. Edmund Whitmore. He came first, tall, restless, with the charm of a man accustomed to easy smiles and easier excuses. My mother wasn't the easiest of women, Monsieur Poirot, he said, lighting a cigarette. She had her own opinions, and heaven help anyone who crossed them. But she didn't deserve this. Poirot studied him gently. You are the heir, Monsieur Whitmore? Yes, unless she changed her will. And did she intend to? He hesitated. She threatened to several times. She didn't approve of my finances. The gambling? Poirot asked softly. Edmund flushed. That's an ugly word. I enjoy a wager, that's all. Poirot inclined his head. And last night, after we left, I went to bed. Violet can confirm it. I didn't hear a thing. Poirot watched him go, noting the tremor in his hand as he stubbed out his cigarette. 2. Violet Whitmore. Violet entered quietly, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief. She could be cruel, she said softly. But she wasn't evil. I think she rather enjoyed watching us squirm. She wanted control, you see. Always control. Poirot's tone was gentle. Madam, your husband says he went to bed at 10. Did you do the same? Yes. We quarreled a little, as we often do, and I went up first. I didn't sleep well. I thought I heard her study door open once, about 10:30. Perhaps the butler bringing tea. Did you hear anything else? A sound like glass. A small clink. Nothing more. Poirot made a note.
Merci, madame.
As she turned to leave, he said softly, Tell me, What perfume do you wear? She looked startled. Perfume? I hardly ever use it. Lady Constance detested scent.
Ah, murmure Poirot.
How interesting.
3 docteurs. Lionel Crane.
Dr. Crane seated himself with the calm of a man long used to being questioned. You were here quite late last night, doctor? Yes. I left about 10 after attending to a patient in the village earlier. Lady Constance seemed perfectly well then. You were in her confidence? In certain matters, yes. She had a strong constitution but a weak heart. I warned her to rest more. And the matter of the tea, who prepared it? Mrs. Hargreaves, of course. Peters served it. I believe Miss Briggs brought the sugar. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Miss Briggs? Yes. She mentioned it to me when we met in the hall. She said Lady Constance had rung again. A last-minute request for lavender sugar, of all things. Some fancy she'd taken up recently. Poirot's eyes glinted. Lavender sugar, indeed. That is most singular. For Miss Eleanor Briggs. The secretary entered nervously, her hands clutching her notebook. Monsieur Poirot, she began. I don't know how I can help. I only saw her for a moment last night. You brought her the lavender sugar? Yes, sir. She asked for it just before 11. I carried the jar from the pantry myself. She seemed quite calm. She even smiled. She said, You may go, Eleanor. I've everything I need now. Indeed, said Poirot. And you locked the door behind you? No, sir. I left it open. She locked it herself, I think. I heard the bolt slide as I went down the hall. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. And this lavender sugar, who made it? Mrs. Hargreaves, sir. A recipe of her own. Lady Constance was very fond of it. 5. Major Gerald Fenton. The Major appeared deeply shaken. She was a grand woman, Poirot, he said thickly. I've known her 30 years. Never thought to see her end like this. You played bridge with her last night? Yes. Lost badly, too. She laughed about it, said I ought to stick to soldiers, not suits. You left at what hour? About 10, I suppose. I had a final whiskey with Edmund, then went up. Didn't hear a thing afterward. Poirot regarded him for a moment. You are fond of whiskey, Major? Eh? Oh yes, a tot now and then. Then perhaps, said Poirot delicately, you will allow me to see your glass from last night. It may tell me something. The Major blinked. My glass? Oui, said Poirot, smiling faintly. Even a glass, mon cher Major, can be a most eloquent witness. When the interviews concluded, Poirot sat for a time in silence. The house lay hushed, the only sound the faint ticking of the ormolu clock on the mantelpiece. Hastings waited, scarcely daring to interrupt. Well, Poirot, he said at last, what do you make of it all? Poirot smiled slightly. A curious puzzle, Hastings. A door locked, a key within, a cup of poisoned tea, and a hint, just a hint, of lavender sugar. There is a pattern, but it is not yet clear. He rose, smoothing his cuffs. We shall return to the study. There is one detail, mon ami, that troubles me exceedingly. Something that is there, yet not there. What do you mean? Poirot's eyes gleamed. You will see. When one begins to think with order and method, Hastings, even the silence of a locked room begins to speak. And already, I fancy, I hear the first whisper. Chapter 4. The questions begin. It was near noon when Hercule Poirot returned to Lady Constance's study. The constables had gone, the coroner's van had departed, and only the faintest trace of disorder remained. A small rug slightly out of place, a faint ring of moisture where the teacup had stood. The scent of lavender lingered like a ghost that would not be dismissed. Poirot stood in the doorway for a moment, immaculately neat, gloved hands folded, his head tilted in thoughtful contemplation. Hastings, notebook ready, hovered just behind him, conscious that the smallest movement might interrupt whatever subtle process was already at work in the little Belgian's mind. Lestrade, by contrast, seemed restless. We've been over it all once already, Monsieur Poirot. What more can you hope to see? The room was locked, the keys inside, and the window bolts haven't been touched. Poirot raised a finger. Pardon, Inspector. There is always more to see, if one looks with the eyes that observe, not merely the eyes that see. You English, you have a proverb, seeing is believing. But I, Hercule Poirot, say it is the believing that blinds the seeing. Lestrade gave a short laugh and Hastings smiled faintly. He had heard similar pronouncements before. Poirot crossed to the desk and looked down at the place where Lady Constance had sat. He did not touch anything. He merely gazed at the overturned cup, the small silver spoon, the single envelope lying unaddressed beside it. Then his eyes moved to the floor, where one corner of the Aubusson rug lay ever so slightly turned up. He knelt, carefully lifted it, and smiled. Ah, he murmured.
Voilà.
Hastings peered over his shoulder. What is it, Poirot? Beneath the rug, caught in the nap of the carpet, was a tiny sliver of glass, no larger than a fingernail, curved like the edge of a small vial or bottle. Poirot examined it delicately. A fragment of glass, Hastings. But from what? The teacup? No. It is too thin. A perfume bottle? Perhaps. Or a vial that once held something more deadly. Lestrade frowned. You think the poison was brought here in that? Poirot replaced the fragment on the table, his expression unreadable. Perhaps. Perhaps not. But it was broken, and someone took care to sweep the larger pieces away, leaving only this. That suggests haste and care. A strange combination. He moved next to the fireplace. The ashes had cooled, and among them lay the faint, twisted remains of paper. With the tip of a pencil, Poirot prodded gently until he drew out a half-charred corner of an envelope. The writing was half burned away, but two words remained legible. Whitmore and Company. Hastings said softly, That's Edmund's firm, isn't it? Exactly, said Poirot. And that, Hastings, begins to interest me profoundly. Lestrade muttered. It might be nothing more than business. Poirot smiled. Yes, but tell me, Inspector, what woman burns a business letter after midnight, when she is alone and drinking tea? Non. There is here something of the emotion, the anger, the fear, the impulse. He glanced at the photograph on the desk, the cracked silver frame of the late Colonel Whitmore. The glass still bore a faint smear, as though it had been handled with damp fingers. Poirot bent closer, his keen gaze darting from the photograph to the faint watermark on the desk's polished surface. You see, Hastings, he said softly. This photograph stood a little to the right before. Someone moved it. Why? Hastings frowned. Perhaps she moved it herself? Or perhaps, said Poirot quietly, someone wished to retrieve something that lay behind it. He turned the frame over. The backing had been loosened, then carefully replaced. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, hidden between the photograph and the cardboard backing. Poirot withdrew it delicately. Lestrade whistled. Well, I'll be. The paper was a letter, neatly written in Lady Constance's fine hand. It was dated the day before, and addressed, though unsent, to her solicitor. Poirot read aloud. I am resolved, Mr. Pennington, to make the alteration I mentioned. My son has proved himself incapable of prudence. The new will must reflect that my property shall pass into trust until such time as I see fit. I have no wish that my son's debts, or his wife's indiscretions, should consume what I and the Colonel built together. There was no signature, only the half-written line, Yours faithfully, Constance Whitmore. And then it broke off. Lestrade exhaled sharply. Well, that gives motive enough for young Whitmore. Hastings looked uneasy. You don't think Edmund? Poirot raised his hand. Calm yourself, Hastings. A motive is not a proof. It is the beginning, not the end. For murder, one must have the opportunity, and here is where the little details matter. He turned to Lestrade. Tell me, the key. You were certain it was inside the lock when the door was broken down? Certain. And none of you moved it?
No.
Poirot's eyes half closed. Then I must beg that you have the lock removed for examination. There are ways, Inspector, in which a key may be turned from outside with the aid of a thin wire or string. Not easily, but possible. Lestrade looked skeptical, but he scribbled a note. All right, I'll have the constable take care of it. Poirot gave a small satisfied nod.
Merci.
For if that door could have been locked from outside, then we are looking not at tragedy, but at design. They left the study and returned to the drawing room. Violet Whitmore sat there alone, her face pale against the dark silk of her dress. She started when they entered. "Madam," said Poirot gently, "I regret to trouble you again, but there are certain small matters that require your help." She looked at him warily. "Of course." Poirot seated himself opposite her. "You told us this morning that Lady Constance disliked perfume, yet her study smelled strongly of lavender. Can you explain this?" Violet hesitated. "She used lavender oil sometimes for her nerves. Miss Briggs kept a bottle in her desk drawer. It's possible she spilled some." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, a bottle in her desk drawer, you say? That interests me very much indeed." He rose, bowed, and withdrew without another word. Back in the study, Poirot went directly to the middle drawer of the desk. With Lestrade's permission, he opened it. Inside lay the usual articles of stationery: pens, sealing wax, a packet of letters, and, tucked neatly in one corner, a small glass bottle labeled Lavandula Oil Apith. "Crane and Company," Hastings exclaimed. "Crane! That's the doctor." "Precisely," said Poirot. He lifted the bottle carefully. "Half empty. And notice, Hastings, the rim is chipped." Lestrade frowned. "Could that be where your bit of glass came from?" "Just so, Inspector. And that tells us something very important. Someone used this bottle recently, roughly, perhaps to pour a drop or two into the tea. But why would Lady Constance perfume her own tea with lavender oil? It is bitter, unmistakably so." Hastings looked startled. "You mean—" Poirot turned the bottle in his fingers, his voice quiet but certain. "I mean, Hastings, that the lavender oil may have been the disguise, the mask that concealed the poison's scent. And now we must ask ourselves, who among these good people had both the access and the knowledge to prepare such a cup?" Lestrade muttered. "The cook brewed the tea." "Oui." "But the sugar, the lavender sugar, was brought by Miss Briggs. The bottle of lavender came from Dr. Crane. The teacup was carried by Peters. The opportunity, Inspector, has been distributed with almost mathematical fairness among them all." He smiled suddenly, that small, enigmatic smile Hastings knew too well. "Eh bien, I think our murderer believes himself or herself very clever. But you see, Hastings, cleverness, it is like perfume. A little too much, and one cannot help but notice." They left the study at last, and Poirot paused by the staircase, gazing up toward the landing where the bedrooms lay. "Come, Hastings," he said softly. "We shall next speak to the servants. There are always eyes that see, even when lips remain silent. And already I begin to discern, yes, faintly, the shape of the truth beneath the lavender." Hastings, looking at his friend's face, saw the familiar light in Poirot's eyes, the spark that meant he was, once again, at the scent of the quarry. And far above them, unseen in the hush of the house, a door closed softly, the sound almost indistinguishable from a sigh. Chapter 5: The Red Herrings. The morning after Lady Constance's death dawned with deceptive calm. The lawns of Lavender Hill shone silver in the mist, and the faint scent of rain hung over the valley. Yet within the house, civility was stretched as taut as a violin string. Conversations hushed as footsteps passed. Doors closed more softly than usual. The very air seemed to vibrate with the awareness of accusation. Poirot, perfectly turned out in dove-gray, was already at the breakfast table when Hastings descended. The detective's plate was untouched, save for one neatly dissected croissant. "Ah, mon ami," said Poirot cheerfully. "You sleep well after murder?" Hastings flushed slightly. "I hardly think anyone slept particularly well, Poirot." "Just so," said Poirot, stirring his coffee. "And yet some will have slept better than others. Guilt, Hastings, is an unsatisfactory bedfellow. But innocence sleeps soundly, even when it ought not to." Before Hastings could reply, Lestrade entered, looking harried and out of temper. Well, Monsieur Poirot, we've had a bit of development. The coroner's report came through early this morning. He placed a folded document on the table. Cause of death: digitalis poisoning. Strong dose, masked by the lavender oil. Poirot's eyes brightened. Tiens, just as I suspected. So, Lady Constance did not die of the heart, but of the drug that treats it. It is neat. Hastings, very neat. Like a line of embroidery. The killer thought of everything, save the one thing that always betrays them: the psychology. Lestrade pulled out a chair. I've already spoken to the doctor. Crane claims he prescribed the digitalis weeks ago, for the lady's heart trouble, and that she kept it locked away. Claims he hasn't touched the bottle since. Convenient, murmured Poirot. And who knew of this medicine? Everyone in the house, more or less, said Lestrade grimly. The servants fetched it often enough, and Miss Briggs administered it when the old lady was unwell. Still, I've sent a man to fetch the bottle for testing. Poirot nodded, pleased. Excellent. The circle of knowledge, it narrows, but gently. By late morning, the questioning resumed in Lady Constance's drawing room. Poirot had commandeered the space for his interviews, which Hastings privately thought were more like psychological duels than interrogations. The first to enter was Major Gerald Fenton. His uniform jacket was a little too tight, his manner brisk, his face flushed from the breakfast brandy he believed went unnoticed. Dreadful business, Poirot. Absolutely dreadful, he began. The poor lady, heart gave out. Did it? You're not suggesting foul play still? Poirot smiled faintly. I suggest only that her heart was assisted, Major, by certain external influences. Please sit. Fenton blanched. Good Lord. You were an old friend of the Colonel's, were you not? Poirot continued mildly. Indeed. Served together in Burma. Constance and I, well, we'd kept in touch. Poirot inclined his head. And last night, where were you between the hours of 11 and midnight? Reading, said Fenton promptly. In the library. I suffer from insomnia. Peters brought me a whiskey around 11. I was there till well after midnight. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The same Peters who took in Lady Constance's tea? Yes, I believe so. Hard-working fellow. Then you would have seen him return to the kitchen afterward? Fenton hesitated. I can't quite recall. I may have nodded off. Poirot's expression was unreadable. You read yourself into slumber, then? But you said you suffer from insomnia, Major. The flush deepened on Fenton's cheeks. Yes, well, the whiskey helped, you see. Of course, murmured Poirot. Whiskey. The most patriotic of sleeping draughts. Hastings suppressed a smile. Fenton rose soon after, visibly uncomfortable. When he had gone, Poirot remarked quietly. A man who lies about a small thing, Hastings, often lies because the truth, however small, is inconvenient. I wonder what small truth the good Major conceals. The next to enter was Miss Eleanor Briggs, the secretary. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed, but her bearing was brisk, even defiant. You wished to see me, Monsieur Poirot?
Mais oui, mademoiselle.
You were very devoted to Lady Constance, were you not? I worked for her for 4 years. She was a fair employer, though not a gentle one. Ah, and yet you remained. That speaks of loyalty. Miss Briggs's lips tightened. Loyalty, yes, and necessity. One cannot always choose one's employment. Poirot nodded. Just so. Now, mademoiselle, the lavender oil, it was kept in your desk. Yes, Lady Constance found it soothing. And when did you last use it? Yesterday evening, before dinner. She had one of her headaches. I gave her a drop on a handkerchief. Poirot regarded her closely. The same bottle that was later found in her desk. Chipped? Her eyes flickered. Chipped? I don't know how that happened. Perhaps you dropped it? I said I didn't. Poirot inclined his head.
Bien sûr.
And yet, a curious thing, your fingerprints were found on the cup. Her composure faltered. I may have moved it when tidying the study earlier that evening. Is that a crime, Monsieur Poirot?
No, mademoiselle.
But murder is. She rose abruptly. Then perhaps you should ask the doctor, who gave her the poison, rather than the secretary who dusted her desk. When she was gone, Hastings looked uneasy. She's hiding something. Poirot nodded. Yes, Hastings. But what she hides is not murder. It is pride. She hates to be suspected, and so she acts guilty. Then you think she's innocent? Poirot smiled enigmatically. I think, my friend, that innocence and guilt are sometimes distinguished only by a tremor of the voice. We shall see. Dr. Lionel Crane followed. His calm was almost studied. His black bag rested neatly on the table beside him. I suppose you'll want to talk about the medicine, he said evenly. Poirot's tone was mild. Naturally, doctor. You prescribed digitalis. Yes, in tablet form. It's a dangerous drug in untrained hands, but she was careful. I cautioned her often. Poirot leaned forward slightly. And yet, she is dead, so someone was careless. You kept the records. I did. And the bottle is in the cabinet at her bedside. Locked. It should be. Poirot looked up sharply. Should be. Dr. Crane hesitated, then sighed. Truthfully, the key was mislaid a few days ago. I meant to have the lock replaced. Lady Constance wasn't pleased about it. Ah, said Poirot softly. A missing key, another one. How interesting. The key to the medicine, the key to the study, both vanished, both turning up where they should not. Mon cher Hastings, do you not see how symmetrical our murderer is? Lestrade grunted. Could have been coincidence. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Coincidence, Inspector, is the refuge of the unimaginative. Crane's composure never faltered, but his hand gripped the chair arm just a fraction too tightly. Poirot saw it. When the doctor had left, Hastings exhaled. You think he did it? Poirot shrugged delicately. He had the means and perhaps the knowledge, but I do not yet smell guilt. He fears discovery, not of murder, but of something else.
Quelque chose d'intime.
Something personal. By the late afternoon, the household was fracturing under the strain. Edmund Whitmore prowled the terrace like a trapped animal, smoking endlessly. His wife Violet remained in her room, weeping behind a locked door. Miss Briggs kept to her writing desk, scribbling notes for an inventory that no one had asked for. Lestrade was jubilant when word came from the constable. Traces of digitalis had been found in the lavender oil bottle. That clinches it, he exclaimed. The secretary mixed it. Motive, jealousy, or revenge, doesn't matter which. It's murder. Poirot merely raised an eyebrow. You are too quick, my dear inspector. You leap to the end without crossing the bridge. Who had access to both the bottle and the medicine? Miss Briggs, yes, but so had Dr. Crane. And what of the cook who cleaned the desk? Or the husband, who prowled the house at night? Non. You have not yet used the little gray cells. He turned to Hastings. Do you recall, mon ami, the scent in the study, how strong it was? That was no accident. The murderer wanted the lavender noticed. That, I think, was their greatest error. A criminal hides what must be concealed, but a clever criminal displays it, and thereby betrays themselves. Hastings frowned. Then you mean? Poirot smiled. I mean that the lavender is our red herring. The true poison lies elsewhere, hidden in something too ordinary to see. And before this day is done, I intend to find it. Outside, the sky darkened to violet, the color of mourning and deceit. Within, the little Belgian detective stood very still, head tilted, eyes half closed, as though listening to the house itself whisper its secrets. And faintly, very faintly, it did. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The third morning at Lavender Hill broke gray and reluctant, as though the sun itself mistrusted the house. A chill had crept into the air, and the scent of lavender, faint but persistent, still seemed to cling to the corridors. Poirot took his breakfast alone, neatly slicing a boiled egg with mathematical precision. Hastings entered to find him thus engaged, head bent slightly, his eyes distant with thought. Good morning, Poirot. You're up early again. Planning to question the servants.
Mais non, mon ami, Poirot said softly.
Today we do not question. Today we observe. He dabbed his mouth with his napkin. Yesterday, everyone spoke too much. The guilty, Hastings, often cannot bear silence. Today we listen instead. Hastings sat, perplexed. You think the murderer will give themselves away without being pressed? Poirot's eyes twinkled. A single word, a gesture, a misplaced object, these are more eloquent than all the confessions in the world. At 10 o'clock, Poirot gathered everyone in the morning room under pretext of clarifying the household's timeline. Lady Constance's portrait watched solemnly from the wall, the painted lavender in her lap echoing the faint scent that seemed now to haunt the very plaster. Edmund Whitmore stood by the hearth, hands thrust deep into his pockets. Miss Briggs hovered by the door, pale and wary. Violet was absent, still unwell, according to her maid, and Dr. Crane sat in a hard-backed chair, his face expressionless, fingers clasped in a surgeon's precision. Major Fenton lounged with exaggerated ease, a man too conscious of being watched. Poirot smiled benignly. My friends, we are here merely to arrange the events of the night before Lady Constance's death. You see, I am confused. He spread his hands. And when Hercule Poirot is confused, he arranges his facts like a box of chocolates, so that nothing touches that which it is not. He turned to Miss Briggs. You, mademoiselle, said you retired at 10? Yes, Monsieur Poirot. I had letters to type in my room. And the lavender oil, you placed it in Lady Constance's desk at what time? Before dinner, around 7. Poirot nodded.
Très bien.
And you did not see it again?
Non.
Poirot turned smoothly to Major Fenton. You, mon major, you were reading in the library? Yes, till past midnight. Did you, by chance, hear the sound of footsteps in the corridor about 11:30? Fenton frowned. I can't say I did, though I thought I heard the study door close once. Poirot inclined his head.
Merci.
Dr. Crane, you arrived that evening at what hour? Shortly after dinner. I left at 10:30, when Lady Constance said she would retire. Ah, and did she complain of feeling unwell? No, on the contrary. She was in her usual spirits. Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. Then she died within perhaps 2 hours of your leaving. How strange that her heart, so strong at 10:30, failed so utterly at midnight. Crane's lips tightened. Digitalis acts swiftly if taken in excess. It would not have lingered long. Just so, murmured Poirot. And yet, something puzzles me. He rose, crossed to the window, and turned back suddenly. Lady Constance's wristwatch was found stopped at 11:42. You recall that, Inspector Lestrade? Lestrade nodded. Yes, likely fell when she collapsed. Poirot raised an eyebrow. And yet, the clock on the mantel stopped at 11:27. The key was wound, but the mechanism jammed. 2 times, both near midnight, but not the same. Does that not strike you as, how do you say, curiously precise? Hastings blinked. But clocks do stop at odd times, Poirot. Ah, mon ami. Not 2 clocks in the same room, within 15 minutes of each other, unless someone wished to fix the time of death. There was a collective stir. Edmund straightened sharply. You mean someone tampered with them? Poirot's tone was gentle. Perhaps. The murderer may have wished to mislead us. Imagine, a visitor enters the study, gives Lady Constance her tea, and later sets the clock and watch to suggest an earlier death. Why? To protect an alibi, perhaps. Or to accuse another. Lestrade frowned. But how do we prove that? Poirot's eyes gleamed. By the detail, Inspector. Always by the detail. That afternoon, Poirot moved about the house with quiet purpose. Hastings followed dutifully, notebook in hand. They examined the study again. Poirot's gaze lingered on the tea tray. The teaspoon, the sugar bowl, the little strainer, all gleamed in the pale light. Do you see, Hastings? Everything is so clean. Too clean. The murderer was tidy. They washed the implements. But one thing they forgot. He bent suddenly, plucking something from beneath the table leg, a small paper twist, like the kind used to seal medicinal powders. The faintest trace of a crystalline residue clung to its inside. Hastings gasped. Is that? Poirot held it to the light. Digitalis, I think. But more interesting, look at the fold. It is the chemist's fold, exact, efficient as a doctor or apothecary would make it. Not a servant. Not a housewife. Then Dr. Crane? Poirot shook his head. Non. He is too careful. He would have destroyed it. This was kept to measure to be sure of the dosage. The murderer feared underdoing it, or overdoing it. That tells us of hesitation, of fear. A physician would not hesitate. He slipped the paper into an envelope. A clue in detail, Hastings. A small thing, but already the shape of the truth grows sharper. Later that evening, Poirot visited Violet Whitmore in her room. The curtains were drawn. The air smelled faintly of violets and stale tears. She sat in a chair, her face pale and streaked with fatigue. Madam, said Poirot softly, you grieve, and I do not intrude long. But tell me, the night before your mother-in-law's death, you had words with her. She flinched. How did you? Poirot smiled faintly. It is my business to know such things. The servants here, they repeat. Lady Constance accused you of indiscretion? Violet's lips trembled. She said I was unfit for Edmund, that I'd ruined him. She said she would cut him off. But I didn't kill her. I only wanted her to understand. Of course, said Poirot gently. And you were in your room all that night? Yes. No one saw you?
No.
Edmund was downstairs. Drinking, I think. Poirot's gaze softened.
Merci, madame.
You have helped me very much. When he left, Hastings caught his arm. Poirot, you don't believe she did it? Poirot looked down the long corridor, where the portraits of the Whitmores stared in sepulchral silence.
No, Hastings.
She lacks the will, but perhaps she knows who did and protects them. The heart, my friend, is sometimes more dangerous than the brain. That night, Poirot sat by the fire in his small guest room, hands steepled beneath his chin. Hastings waited, restless. Poirot, he burst out at last. You've been circling the matter for days. What is it you're not telling me? Poirot smiled slightly. Do you recall the letter, Hastings? The one half burned in the grate? Yes, from Edmund's firm. Just so. And now this morning, I observed another thing. The writing paper Lady Constance used, cream watermarked. But the burned fragment was on ivory stock. Different. That letter did not come from her hand, but from another's, perhaps to her. It was she who burned it, yes, but why? Because it accused, or because it forgave? Hastings frowned. You think the letter was a threat? Perhaps. Or perhaps it was love. There are two poisons, Hastings, one for the body, one for the heart. The first kills swiftly. The second drives to the first. He rose suddenly.
Come?
There is one person we have not yet questioned. Who? Poirot smiled. The butler. Peters the butler stood in the corridor outside the servants' hall, his face a mask of propriety. Poirot's questions were mild at first, the tea, the tray, the routine of the evening. Then casually, you cleaned the silver that night, and a soupa? Yes, sir. And the teaspoon, it was replaced on the tray after? Yes, sir. Miss Briggs handed it to me. Poirot paused. Ah, Miss Briggs. Did she handle the cup also? Peters thought. She did, sir. She set it by the tray. But the sugar, that was Dr. Crane's doing. He came in to fetch something, I think, and stirred it himself. Said he was making it properly. Poirot's eyes glinted. Indeed. Yes, sir. I thought nothing of it. Lady Constance often took her tea strong. Poirot bowed slightly. You have been most helpful, my friend. More helpful, perhaps, than you yet know. When the butler had gone, Hastings whispered, So the doctor did stir her tea? Poirot nodded. Yes, and there, Hastings, lies the clue in detail. The doctor stirred, but he claimed he left at 10:30, before the tea was taken up.
Comment est-ce possible?
Either the tea was delayed, or the doctor's memory is false. One cannot stir a cup that has not yet been brewed. Hastings blinked. Then he lied. Poirot smiled faintly. He lied, or someone wishes us to think he lied. The time, the clocks, the lavender tout sela, it is arranged, like the notes in a symphony. And the melody it plays, Hastings, is almost complete. He turned toward the dark window, where the moon glimmered faintly through the mist. Tomorrow, he said softly, we shall hear the discord, and then, perhaps, the final harmony. Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The house at Lavender Hill had fallen into a peculiar silence, the kind of silence that is louder than any sound. Even the servants spoke only in hushed tones, glancing over their shoulders as if the walls themselves might overhear. Outside, the wind rattled the eaves and tossed the autumn leaves across the driveway. But within, a storm brewed far subtler and infinitely more dangerous. Hastings entered the morning room to find Poirot seated in his accustomed place. A small notebook open before him, a thin pencil poised delicately between his fingers. His eyes were half closed, but Hastings knew that behind those lids the little gray cells were working with their usual relentless precision. Poirot, Hastings began. The household seems uneasy, more than yesterday. Poirot did not reply immediately. He tapped his pencil lightly against the page. Yes, Hastings. The tension is rising, as it always does when lies are laid bare. Lies, mon ami, are like threads in a tapestry. Pull at one, and the others quiver. The challenge is to follow the threads carefully, lest the whole weave collapses. Hastings shivered. And you think more lies are present?
Mais oui.
There is the matter of the clocks, the teacup, the lavender oil, all leading to a larger fabric. Now, we must see who is afraid and why. Poirot began with Edmund Whitmore, who was pacing the terrace with restless agitation. The young man's brow was furrowed, and his usual easy charm had evaporated under the shadow of suspicion. Edmund, Poirot said, rising to meet him, we must speak of last evening. You were in the house after 10. Yes, Edmund admitted reluctantly. I was in my study. And you heard nothing unusual? I may have heard my mother's door close, but no, nothing else. Poirot studied him for a long moment. And your debts, Edmund? Are they as serious as whispered? Edmund flushed. I've had some difficulties, yes, but nothing that would drive me to murder my mother. Ah, you are angry, yes. I can see the heat of indignation in your eyes. And yet, Hastings, observed the tremor in his hand. That, my friend, is the sign of a man whose secrets bite at his conscience. What secrets? Not the financial ones, I think, but there is something else here, something private, hidden. Edmund, noticing Poirot's penetrating gaze, looked away. I don't know what you mean. Poirot only smiled faintly.
Patience, mon ami.
All will be revealed in time. The Belgian then turned his attention to Violet Whitmore. She had returned to the drawing room, pale and somber, but her posture was rigid, as though she was determined to appear composed. Madam, said Poirot gently, you are troubled. I am, she admitted, voice low. I feared for Edmund last night. He had been upset. My mother. She could be cruel. And you? Poirot asked softly. Did you quarrel with Lady Constance? Yes, she whispered. But only words. I would never. Poirot leaned back, his gaze fixed. Ah, but words, madam, can carry as much poison as the strongest drug. Yes? Violet shook her head, tears glistening. No, I swear it. I wanted her to change her mind. Not. Hastings, standing nearby, whispered, Poirot, she seems honest. Poirot did not reply immediately. He tapped his pencil lightly against the page. Yes, Hastings. The tension is rising, as it always does when lies are laid bare. Lies, mon ami, are like threads in a tapestry. Pull at one, and the others quiver. The challenge is to follow the threads carefully, lest the whole weave collapses. Hastings shivered. And you think more lies are present?
Mais oui.
There is the matter of the clocks, the teacup, the lavender oil, all leading to a larger fabric. Now, we must see who is afraid and why. Poirot began with Edmund Whitmore, who was pacing the terrace with restless agitation. The young man's brow was furrowed, and his usual easy charm had evaporated under the shadow of suspicion. "Edmund," Poirot said, rising to meet him, "we must speak of last evening. You were in the house after 10. "Yes," Edmund admitted reluctantly. "I was in my study." "And you heard nothing unusual?" "I may have heard my mother's door close, but no, nothing else." Poirot studied him for a long moment. "And your debts, Edmund? Are they as serious as whispered?" Edmund flushed. "I've had some difficulties, yes, but nothing that would drive me to murder my mother." "Ah, you are angry, yes. I can see the heat of indignation in your eyes. And yet," Hastings observed the tremor in his hand, "that, my friend, is the sign of a man whose secrets bite at his conscience." "What secrets?" "Not the financial ones, I think, but there is something else here, something private, hidden." Edmund, noticing Poirot's penetrating gaze, looked away. I don't know what you mean." Poirot only smiled faintly.
Patience, mon ami.
"All will be revealed in time." The Belgian then turned his attention to Violet Whitmore. She had returned to the drawing-room, pale and somber, but her posture was rigid, as though she was determined to appear composed. "Madame," said Poirot gently, "you are troubled." "I am," she admitted, voice low. "I feared for Edmund last night. He had been upset. My mother. She could be cruel." "And you?" Poirot asked softly. "Did you quarrel with Lady Constance?" "Yes," she whispered. "But only words. I would never." Poirot leaned back, his gaze fixed. "Ah, but words, madam, can carry as much poison as the strongest drug. Yes?" Violet shook her head, tears glistening. "No, I swear it. I wanted her to change her mind. Not." Hastings, standing nearby, whispered, "Poirot, she seems honest." Poirot did not reply immediately. He was studying her as though reading an invisible text. "Perhaps, Hastings, perhaps. But notice, she avoids certain subjects. The time she last saw her mother, the small movements of the household. She shields herself behind propriety. Very clever, very clever." Dr. Lionel Crane was next. Poirot's questions were careful, surgical. "Doctor, you were in the house the evening of Lady Constance's death. Tell me, what precisely did you do after dinner?" "I attended to a patient in the village," Crane said smoothly. "I left Lavender Hill around 10:30. "And yet," said Poirot, "someone saw you stirring the tea at the study desk?" Crane's expression hardened. "I might have adjusted the tea tray earlier. I did not stay past my departure." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Ah, yes, but there is the matter of the lavender oil bottle, half empty, rim chipped, residue of digitalis found in the folds of paper nearby. You know the house well, doctor. Who else could have manipulated these items with such knowledge?" Crane hesitated. "I cannot say." "Then perhaps you lie, or you are hiding something more personal." "Mon ami, every man has weaknesses. But the cleverest murderer leaves a detail overlooked. Ah, the lavender. The murderer scented the tea deliberately to disguise the poison, but also to draw attention to themselves. That is vanity." Crane's hands twitched. I had nothing to do with it." Poirot smiled faintly. "No, perhaps not. But someone close to you did, yes? And they trusted your knowledge, your skill. That is why the poison is placed so perfectly, yet why it leaves a fragment of evidence behind. Every criminal believes they are smarter than the law, and yet he let the sentence hang, as though the house itself could finish it." By late afternoon, Poirot's observations led him to speak quietly with the servants. They were frightened, deferential, and eager to please, yet each gave him tiny inconsistencies. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hargreaves, admitted that she had seen Edmund wandering the corridors past 11. Peters the butler had noticed Miss Briggs in the study after tea, though she claimed she had only delivered a message. Even the cook, Mrs. Turner, admitted that she had seen Dr. Crane near the tray of tea at an hour she could not precisely recall. Poirot tapped his pencil. "Notice, Hastings, every servant speaks truthfully in part, yet the totality reveals contradictions. That is the nature of lies. They emerge in fragments. And from these fragments, a picture forms. Hastings frowned. But which is the truth? Everyone's story overlaps and conflicts. Ah, mon ami, therein lies the art of detection. One must find the single inconsistency, the one small detail that cannot be reconciled with any other truth. That is the thread that unravels the entire web. Poirot spent the evening alone in Lady Constance's study, his gaze wandering from the desk to the silver teacup to the half-charred letter in the grate. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of floorboards in distant corridors. He turned the letter over in his hands. Different paper, ivory, not cream, written by another hand. He murmured to himself. So, someone wrote to her, perhaps to warn, perhaps to accuse, and she burned it to hide the message. But the poison, that was not spontaneous. It required calculation, opportunity, knowledge, and a motive strong enough to silence conscience. Hastings, peering over his shoulder, asked, "Poirot, do you think Edmund is guilty?" Poirot shook his head slightly.
No, Hastings.
He has faults, pride, perhaps imprudence, vanity. But the killer is not the obvious sinner. They hide behind propriety, behind fear, behind appearances. And appearances, Hastings, are often more dangerous than weapons. As they left the study, a chill draft whispered through the corridors. Poirot's eyes caught a small detail on the floor, a faint smear of lavender near the door, unnoticed before. He bent, touched it lightly, and his eyes gleamed. "Ah, Hastings," he murmured. The first faint note of truth, a clue hidden within artifice. Tomorrow we shall follow it. And in the dark corners of Lavender Hill, the household slept uneasily, not knowing that their secrets were being counted, measured, and weighed by a little Belgian with an eye for the smallest tremor of guilt. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The following morning, the house at Lavender Hill seemed almost oppressive in its stillness. Even the wind held its breath as if afraid to disturb the fragile equilibrium of suspicion that Poirot had been meticulously assembling. Hastings noted the servants moving more carefully than ever, eyes lowered, their steps muted against the polished floors. Poirot, on the other hand, appeared entirely at ease. Seated at the breakfast table with an immaculate napkin folded precisely on his lap, he sipped his tea with deliberate calm, every movement suggesting patience, control, and a profound attention to detail. Hastings, carrying his notebook like a talisman, lingered nearby. "Poirot," he whispered, "the house feels like it's holding its breath. Do you think anyone will break today?" The detective's eyes glinted with his usual, inscrutable amusement. "Ah, mon ami, the heart cannot endure deception indefinitely. It is a curious thing. Guilt is not always logical, but it is emotional. And it is the emotions that betray us, yes. Today, Hastings, I think the first crack will appear." Poirot began his day with the servants, quietly questioning Peters and Mrs. Hargreaves. Each of them insisted they had seen nothing unusual, and yet the little Belgian noticed the tremor of a hand here, the hesitation of a word there. "Ah, mon ami," Poirot said to Hastings as they left the servants' hall. "Observe, even the most loyal servant will betray their master, but not by action, by fear. And fear, Hastings, is a language everyone speaks." Hastings shivered. "I think I am beginning to understand, Poirot. They are terrified, yes, but not of you. They are terrified of the truth." "Exactly," said Poirot. "And the truth, our truth, will come, if we wait and listen." By mid-morning, Poirot summoned Violet Whitmore to the morning room. She entered reluctantly, dressed in simple morning black, her eyes red from sleepless nights. She hesitated in the doorway as though uncertain whether she was coming to confession or accusation. "Madam," Poirot said gently, "I do not come to accuse. I come to understand. That is all." Violet lowered herself into the nearest chair, clutching her hands. I can't do much. I did nothing. I swear it. But I can't tell anyone, not really. They would never believe me." Poirot leaned forward slightly, voice soft and precise. Then perhaps you will tell me who has been cruel or secretive in the house, who might have acted out of fear, or anger, or even love. Violet's lips quivered. It's Edmund. He wasn't supposed to be like this. My mother-in-law, she thought she could control everything. And her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. Poirot waited patiently. Hastings could barely watch. Tell me, madam, Poirot continued gently. Did anyone enter the study after the tea was made? Violet's voice trembled. Yes, I saw Miss Briggs. I thought she was just tidying. But she stayed too long. She held the cup. Hastings whispered, Poirot, this is the breakthrough, isn't it? Poirot nodded. Oui. The first emotional crack. She has revealed the first detail that was hidden, unintentionally, by fear. Now we must measure it against the others. Poirot then sent for Miss Briggs herself. The secretary arrived pale and anxious, her fingers twisting nervously at the hem of her dress. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor. Mademoiselle, Poirot began calmly. Yesterday I asked about the lavender oil, about the tea, about your movements. You were precise. You answered truthfully as one should. Yet, Hastings, notice, a truth may conceal a falsehood. The manner of delivery is the key. Miss Briggs's lips parted slightly, a faint tremor in her voice. I don't understand, Monsieur Poirot. Let us recall, said Poirot softly. The tea tray, the cup, who handled it, the sugar, the lavender oil, who stirred, who delivered it. She swallowed hard. I did, yes, but only as part of my duties. I would never. Her voice faltered. Poirot leaned forward, eyes piercing. And yet, you remained in the study longer than anyone saw, yes? Alone? Miss Briggs's composure collapsed entirely. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. I did it. I put it in her tea. But I didn't mean to kill her. I only wanted her to stop hurting us, to stop controlling everything. Hastings gasped. Poirot. She confesses. Poirot did not move immediately. He sat back, hands folded, regarding her with his usual serene scrutiny.
Ah, mademoiselle.
We have the confession, yet we must examine the heart. Why did you act? Out of malice or out of despair? And who helped you, even unwittingly? Miss Briggs's sobs intensified. I only had the lavender oil. I thought it would calm her, not harm. But Dr. Crane, he told me once how careful to measure things. I didn't know. I just wanted her to see how serious we were. Poirot nodded slowly. Emotional action, poorly understood science. A mixture of fear, anger, and ignorance. The first revelation, yes. But there are still questions, Hastings. How did she die so quickly? Why did the clocks show different times? Who ensured the digitalis was in the tea at precisely the right moment? Hastings frowned. You think someone else was involved? Poirot tapped his fingers lightly on the table. Possibly. Or perhaps the accident was completed by a chain of events, misjudged, mismeasured, yet cruelly effective. The emotional turning point, Hastings, is that the heart often acts before the mind. The crime may have begun in anger, yet ended with meticulous precision. That is the part the guilty cannot admit, even to themselves. Miss Briggs wept quietly, rocking in her chair. Poirot rose. Ah, yes, that is enough for now, mademoiselle. You will remain calm and speak truthfully henceforth. That is the only way to serve justice, and perhaps to save conscience. Later, Poirot and Hastings walked the terrace in silence. The autumn air bit at Hastings's cheeks, but Poirot seemed oblivious to cold or wind. Hastings, he said at last, observe, the first emotional crack is invaluable. Once a person admits a detail, even under duress, the rest of the deception often collapses. And from that, one may deduce the timing, the opportunity, and the means. The murderer believes themselves clever, but when the heart trembles, there is no hiding. Hastings shivered. So the confession was partial, not the whole truth?
Exactly, mon ami.
Partial truths, when combined with careful observation, form the complete tapestry. Miss Briggs admits action, but not intent. That is where the remaining lies reside, and where we must now look. Very soon, Hastings, the pattern will emerge, and the final unraveling approaches. The leaves rustled along the terrace, and Poirot's eyes glimmered with that quiet, imperious certainty which had always unsettled friend and foe alike. The little gray cells had been roused, and in that awakening, Hastings felt the invisible threads of Lavender Hill's deadly secret begin to quiver. Chapter 9: The Trap. The evening of the third day at Lavender Hill was cold and still. The wind had dropped, leaving the house in a heavy, almost suffocating silence. In the drawing room, the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the walls. Outside, the night seemed to hold its breath, as though the very world knew that something decisive was about to occur. Poirot sat in his usual chair, small hands folded neatly before him. Hastings perched on the edge of a nearby settee, anxious and alert, like a soldier awaiting orders. Across the room, the household gathered: Edmund Whitmore, restless and flushed with suppressed anger; Violet Whitmore, pale but composed; Miss Briggs, trembling behind her fan of folded hands; Dr. Crane, calm but with the faintest twitch in his fingers; and Major Fenton, attempting ease while his eyes darted about nervously. Poirot regarded each in turn, his expression serene, almost gentle. "Mess Amos," he began, his voice soft but with an authority that silenced the room. "We are here to clarify certain matters, matters of grave importance. We have spoken separately. Now we shall speak together. For truth, as you know, is not a solitary creature. It appears only in full light." Lestrade, standing in the doorway, muttered something about procedure, but Poirot waved him aside. "Inspector, your duty is noted. Mine is observation, which, I think you will agree, is a higher art." Hastings whispered, "I don't envy them, Poirot. They're all so tense." "Ah, but the tension is the hand that writes the confession, Hastings. And tonight it shall write itself." Poirot began with a calm, precise question. "Mademoiselle Briggs, you handled the tea the night Lady Constance died?" "Yes, Monsieur Poirot," she replied, voice quivering. "And you admit that you placed the lavender oil?" She nodded, swallowing hard. Poirot smiled faintly. "Good. And yet, the bottle was half empty, the rim chipped, and a trace of digitalis remained in the folds of paper nearby. How came that, mademoiselle? You did not know about the digitalis?" "No." "I swear." Her voice rose slightly. "I only thought it would calm her, not harm her. I had no intention." Poirot raised a hand. Of course. But intention is not always what matters. N'est-ce pas? The effect is what is seen." He turned slightly, addressing the entire room. "Now let us consider the chronology. Lady Constance drank the tea after it was prepared. The clocks and her watch stopped at different times, yes? Why? Because someone wished to confuse the exact time of death." Hastings leaned forward. "That would explain the conflicting alibis." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Exactment, Hastings. And who had access to the tea, the lavender oil, the digitalis? Miss Briggs? Dr. Crane? Perhaps, but observe. Whoever did this, they relied on the habits of the others. They assumed Miss Briggs would not notice, Dr. Crane would not interfere, and the servants would be too timid to speak. That is the hallmark of cleverness, yes, but also of vanity." Poirot paused, letting his words sink in. The room was silent except for the crackle of the fire. Then he leaned forward slightly. "Dr. Crane, you were present in the study at 10:30. Yet Miss Briggs says she was there at 11:40. Which is true?" Crane's fingers twitched. I had already left. Perhaps I returned briefly. I cannot recall." Poirot's smile was faint, controlled, but cold. "Ah, and yet you instructed her on how to handle the tea, oui? On how to stir it carefully." Crane's eyes flickered toward Miss Briggs, who now seemed to shrink into her chair. I merely advised on measurements." "Yes." Poirot's gaze swept the room. "Observe, Ms. Amos. How fear speaks without words." The doctor's hands trembled slightly, involuntarily, while the secretary avoids my eyes. Why? Because they know, subconsciously, that someone's act was guided, subtly, carefully, by knowledge only one of them possesses. The little gray cells can see, even when the heart tries to hide. Hastings whispered. So someone directed her, but did not commit the act themselves? Exactment, Hastings. And that is the key. The emotional turning point we observed yesterday, when Miss Briggs broke, tells us she was the agent, not the architect. Poirot rose suddenly, hands clasped behind his back, and began to pace slowly. Now consider the motives. Lady Constance, as we know, had altered her will. Edmund, you were to receive less than expected. Perhaps enough to irritate, to frustrate, but hardly sufficient to induce murder. Yes. Edmund bristled. I would never. Poirot raised a hand. You, mon ami, are truthful in part, but we will return to that later. Violet, you feared your husband's mother, yes, but fear does not necessarily compel one to kill. It shapes hesitation, perhaps resentment. Mademoiselle Briggs, you acted in terror, in a misguided sense of justice. He paused in front of Dr. Crane. But someone had to guide the poison to its target. Someone with knowledge of digitalis, knowledge that the poor secretary could not possess. Dr. Crane, tell me, when you left the study, did you notice anything unusual? Crane hesitated, then spoke with unusual precision. The cup, it was already prepared. I had no hand in the final measure. I assumed nothing would happen until morning. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Ah, you assumed, but someone trusted your knowledge, yes? They followed your instructions, perhaps unintentionally creating the fatal dose. A combination of fear and ignorance, guided by expertise. A beautiful, tragic collaboration. Poirot paused once more, sweeping his gaze over the assembled household. Now, let us observe reactions. He gestured toward Miss Briggs. You acted out of emotion, and yet you were not alone. Someone else's influence was present, subtle, invisible, but critical. Who was it? Violet's lips trembled. Edmund, she whispered. Edmund stiffened. What? Poirot's voice was mild, almost tender. Do you see, Hastings? The net tightens. Emotional influence, fear, expectation. These forces converge, and one cannot hide forever. Someone, perhaps out of frustration, perhaps out of vanity, manipulated the circumstances. Another, perhaps out of obedience or terror, completed the act. Hastings leaned forward, eyes wide. You're saying the murderer isn't just the one who put the poison in the tea? Non, Poirot said softly. The murderer is he or she who orchestrated it. The agent, the one who pressed the cup to the lips, is secondary yet crucial. Every detail must be accounted for, and every lie exposed. Poirot turned to the room in a final, commanding sweep. We shall see the truth tonight, MES Amos. We shall observe who trembles when confronted with the consequences of their actions. For the guilty heart cannot endure scrutiny indefinitely. Even the cleverest mind falters before the light of reason. And tonight, that light shines brightest. The room remained silent, the tension so thick that Hastings could feel it pressing against his chest. Every eye flicked nervously to the little Belgian, who stood immaculately poised, hands clasped, serene and imperious. He had set the trap, and the prey had been drawn willingly into it. Outside, the moon rose high over Lavender Hill, pale and cold. Inside, in the heavy quiet of the drawing room, the threads of fear, guilt, and deception were pulled taut. Somewhere within those walls, the final unraveling awaited, and Poirot's little gray cells, ever vigilant, were ready to follow each tremor of the conscience to its inevitable conclusion. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The drawing room of Lavender Hill was silent, save for the gentle crackle of the dying fire. Outside, the wind stirred the autumn leaves with a cold sigh, as if the night itself waited in anticipation. Inside, every member of the household, Edmund Whitmore, Violet Whitmore, Miss Briggs, Dr. Crane, and Major Fenton, sat tense, their faces pale, eyes flicking nervously to the little Belgian detective. Poirot rose, perfectly composed, hands clasped behind his back. His gaze swept the room with deliberate precision, lingering just long enough to make each person uncomfortable. Hastings sat quietly on the settee, notebook closed, feeling the weight of inevitability in the air. Miss Amos, Poirot began in that measured tone that brooked no interruption. Tonight we shall understand. We shall see the truth, the complete truth, laid bare like the most delicate embroidery, each thread revealed, each color in its place. He paused, allowing the suspense to settle. The tragedy of Lady Constance Whitmore was precise. It was not sudden. It was not accidental. It was the result of careful planning, yet it also required the folly of emotion. One person acted, another influenced, and the consequences were fatal. But let us consider each element in turn. Poirot first addressed Miss Briggs. Mademoiselle, you handled the tea, yes? You placed the lavender oil as you admitted. But the fatal ingredient, the digitalis, was not of your knowledge. You acted with care, with devotion to your mistress. Yet you were the agent, the one whose hands delivered the poison, unknowingly following the guidance of another. Your terror, your obedience, and your desire to please were exploited. Miss Briggs lowered her eyes. Yes, that is true. I did not know. Exactly, Poirot said, nodding gently. You acted, but you did not intend murder. That is why your conscience quivers, why your confession yesterday came in fragments. The poison, precise, fatal, required knowledge beyond your reach. Poirot then turned to Dr. Crane, who sat rigid, expression calm, but eyes sharp. Doctor, you are a man of science, knowledgeable in poisons, meticulous in habit. You were consulted by Miss Briggs regarding the handling of Lady Constance's medicine. You advised her, guided her without ever touching the fatal dose yourself. Yet your knowledge, your expertise, made the act possible. Crane's jaw tightened. I did not intend her death. None, of course not. You believed you were aiding, instructing, as any physician might advise a household assistant. And yet, because of your guidance, the agent acted in a way that produced fatal results. The crime is tragic, yes, but also a collaboration of error, fear, and precise knowledge. Hastings whispered to Poirot. So the doctor is guilty only indirectly? Poirot nodded slightly.
Indirectly, oui.
But that is how clever minds often operate, influence without culpability, yet still the instrument of consequence. Poirot turned then to Edmund Whitmore.
Ah, Edmund.
Your mother had indeed altered her will. You were disappointed, frustrated, yes? But you did not act, nor did you direct action. Yet your emotional unrest, the quarrel, the tension, contributed to the circumstances in which the agent acted. Your emotions were a catalyst, nothing more. That is why you appear guilty to some, but in truth, you are innocent of this ultimate crime. Edmund exhaled, relief barely contained. Then it wasn't me?
No, mon ami, Poirot replied.
Your faults are human, pride, impatience, frustration, but your hands are clean of death. Poirot's gaze then shifted to Violet Whitmore, who had remained silent, trembling. And you, madam, feared your mother-in-law, yes? The tension between you, the fear for Edmund, contributed to the household atmosphere of unease. But you acted only in private, emotionally, not in the orchestration of poison. Your conscience was intact, even if your heart was heavy with dread. Violet's eyes filled with tears. So I didn't. Non, you did not. The heart may tremble, madam, but the mind guides the act. In this case, the mind belonged elsewhere. Poirot's eyes then fixed upon Major Fenton, who shifted in his seat. And you, Major, the distant friend, the man of military habit and appearances, you provided no opportunity, no influence, and no motive. You are indeed, as you said, a friend of the family. Observe Miss Amos, how the innocent may seem suspicious simply because their temperament is proud, poised, and watchful. A lesson for all. Fenton relaxed marginally. So, Poirot, I am clear. Entirely, said Poirot, smiling faintly. Finally, Poirot leaned forward, voice lowering, eyes glimmering with controlled triumph. Now, the crux of the matter. The orchestrator, the mind behind the tragedy. We observed clues, the clocks, the differing times, the half-empty bottle, the folded paper, the teacup, the stir of the tea. Every detail mattered. The agent, Miss Briggs, acted under guidance. That guidance, that precise, fatal counsel, came from one person alone. Dr. Crane. Gasps filled the room. Crane's composure faltered, a single bead of sweat forming at his temple. Poirot continued, serene and relentless. Doctor, you saw the misaligned will, the potential scandal, the disruption of the household. Fear of chaos, combined with pride in your expertise, led you to instruct Miss Briggs in subtle handling, how to stir, how to measure, how to place the cup. You did not touch the poison yourself, but your knowledge ensured the precise administration. You created the conditions, guided the hand, and allowed the emotion of obedience to do the rest. It was clever, far too clever. But a clever crime leaves a trace, and your trace is here, in the details that only a meticulous eye would notice. Crane's eyes darted from Poirot to the others. I did not intend. No, you did not intend murder, Poirot said softly. You intended control. You intended order. Yet the human heart is unpredictable, and the combination of your guidance and Miss Briggs's action led to death. The law will see this differently, yes, but Justice Hastings must first see the truth. And truth, it is always in the details. Poirot leaned back, letting silence settle. Miss Amos, we have now uncovered the full tapestry. Miss Briggs, the agent, acting under fear and loyalty, delivering the fatal tea. Dr. Crane, the orchestrator, whose knowledge and instructions made the act possible. Edmund and Violet, their emotions contributed to circumstance but not to intent. Major Fenton, uninvolved, merely present. Lady Constance's death, the tragic result of human folly, fear, knowledge, and misjudgment combined. Every clue, the clocks, the teacup, the lavender oil, the half-burned letter, the folded paper, pointed to this conclusion. Nothing was coincidental, nothing overlooked, and no one innocent of observation escaped scrutiny. He rose, eyes sweeping the room once more. And now, Miss Amos, we see that even a crime orchestrated with intellect can be unraveled by observation, patience, and the little gray cells. For as clever as the mind may be, it cannot resist the inevitability of detail, of emotion, and of truth. Hastings, amazed, whispered, Poirot, it's incredible. You've untangled everything. All the lies, all the emotions, all the clues. Poirot smiled faintly.
Merci, mon ami.
But it is always a simple law. The crime may be clever, but the truth is cleverer still. Observe, listen, and reason, and all secrets shall emerge. That is the art, Hastings. That is the art of detection. Outside, the wind finally picked up again, scattering the autumn leaves across the grounds of Lavender Hill. Within, the household remained silent, absorbing the revelation, understanding for the first time that the tragic events were not random but the product of human fear, guidance, and emotion. A tapestry revealed, stitch by meticulous stitch. Poirot, content, returned to his chair by the fire, folding his hands. Hastings, notebook now closed forever, felt the quiet triumph of understanding. A complex tragedy unraveled, not by chance, but by observation, logic, and the inexorable work of the little gray cells. The mystery of Lavender Hill had been solved. The truth, as always, had prevailed.